Welcome to Hometown Culture, your weekly Orlando Magic podcast, where your host Seth will be unpacking the news every week. Hello everyone, welcome back to Hometown Culture. My name is Seth. Today we're going to take a little bit of a shift of topics this episode. So we're not going to be talking much, if at all, about the Orlando Magic. Unfortunately, I know, pretty sad, because even though this is an Orlando Magic podcast, I do also want this to be just a basketball loving podcast, right? And we've been going through a very interesting playoffs. We've also had some pretty interesting developments in the conference finals. We actually had a major scare, I would say, of having both of the conference finals ending in sweeps, which was pretty interesting to say the least. Luckily for us, we have the Mavericks and Timberwolves series going to a game number 5 in Minnesota, so we'll see what ends up happening there. But the conference finals kind of were, in terms of series lengths, were kind of duds, because I'm assuming, since it's never been done before, we get the assumption that the Timberwolves are going to be losing this series at some point in the next 3 games. And it'll be interesting because the Boston Celtics swept the Pacers. The Mavericks have been handling business for the most part and that are making it really tough for the Timberwolves here to come out with victories, or with the one victory that they have. So I wanted to take a step back, look at the entire playoffs as a whole, and especially these 2 series and some of the narratives going around the league right now, because it has been frustrating to hear and I wanted to talk about it on here. So let's get right into it. Okay, to get things started, I thought that it would be cool to give my take on the top 3 series in the playoffs so far. In my opinion, I would have gone top 5, but I feel like top 3 is pretty good. So let's start off with the bottom of my top 3 series so far this playoffs, and we've got, surprisingly, the Timberwolves versus Mavericks series, the series that went 3-0 early on and has looked pretty interesting to say the least going into game 5. That series has been one of my favorite series to watch this playoffs. Not only has there been high stakes involved, you have a finals berth on the line here, but you've had multiple games coming down to the last few seconds, and it has been amazing to watch. It has been amazing basketball, amazing from both teams on both ends of the floor through different stretches. Now, the Timberwolves have been getting kind of eaten alive at points throughout this series on the defensive end, but I mean, you balance out with some pretty crazy performances from a Naz Reid in game 2, from a Karl Anthony Towns in game 4, and you got yourself a pretty dang good series, to say the least. And if we're just looking at the games themselves, right? And that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at how much I enjoyed watching this series, witnessing this series, talking about this series, and it's been fun. It's been a fun series, and Luka has been showing out. So has Kyrie Irving. You've had some amazing performances from a Hardy, amazing performance from Hardy. Performances from Hardy, and you also had Derek Lively showing up and really preventing Ant going to the rim, as well as Gafford. It has been very, very fun to watch the schemes from both of these coaches. Both these coaches go to work against each other, and it's just been really enjoyable to watch, witness, and talk about as the series has gone on. And I'm looking forward to see if the Timberwolves can force this series further to a potential 6 or 7 games, or even make history by coming back 3-0. Now, I know I said earlier the assumption is that the Timberwolves are probably going to lose the series, and I still hold that firm because I do not have the confidence to say, hey, the Timberwolves are going to make this turnaround and come back and win the series and go to the finals and potentially win it all. Where they're positioned at right now is so poor. We will see if it changes with as time goes on. But as of right now, they are not looking primed to get there, because even their game 4 win was extremely tough. And that did not give me confidence to be like, oh yeah, they got this in the next few games. And so we'll see what happens. But so far, this 5-game series has been one of my favorites thus far this playoffs, just because of how close the games have been. The back and forth, the barking that Luke has been getting in Rudy Gobert's head with all of the stuff that he's been doing, just playing ball. Not even like the talking aspect, but just playing him so well. Rudy Gobert's been getting picked apart by Kyrie and by Luka Doncic. But at the other end of that, you also have players like Naz Reid hitting 7 of 9 3-point shots, or was it 7 of 10? I forget. In game 2, and just having some pretty interesting performances from the backup players as well, So I think it's going to be something that will be talked about, probably, especially if the Mavs win, as a blowout by the Mavs, like in the future. In future talks, this series will probably not be remembered very well. But if you really dissect this series and go back into how tough it was, like, even though the Mavs have been winning these games, it has also the Timberwolves have also made it tough for them to pull out some of these games. And so I don't think that it's necessarily a series that will be remembered like fondly for how close it was, considering like you had like a Nets Celtics first round series a couple years ago that was pretty close, and no one talks about that anymore. But I think that if you're talking about the games themselves, this series has it all. Like, you had a game winner from Luka in game 2, pretty close comeback in the third quarter by the Timberwolves in game number 3, only to lose it towards the end. And then game 1, just the miraculous upset from the Mavericks in game 1. Game 2 ending with that rimmed out Naz Reid 3. Game 4 ending with a ton of Mavericks missed opportunities, which is another reason why I think that the Timberwolves probably will not take this series as well, because the Mavericks, we're talking about the Mavericks shot making, like they had a lot of looks that were good in game 4 and they just didn't fall for them. And so, like, make or miss league, but trust, if the Mavs have similar looks in the future, I would not doubt them being able to pull this series out going forward. So I think the Timberwolves are going to be beat, but this has been a really fun series to watch and witness so far. Now, my number 2 in this playoffs is going to be the Knicks versus Sixers series. 6-game series in the first round of the playoffs. Very, very fun to me. I think that the animosity between the Sixers and the New York Knicks and like the fan bases was very, very fun to watch. I think that the fact that you had Tyrese Maxey going toe-to-toe with a guy like Jalen Brunson, and also had guys like Josh Hart stepping up in huge, huge ways, and games ending in crazy, crazy ways as well. You had an overtime game in that series. You had a game with the crazy like 6 seconds and 3 or 6 points in like 10 seconds type of thing with the end of I think it was game 2, and you had some pretty interesting performances from Joel Embiid. He had some good games, but him being hobbled definitely hurt the Sixers for sure. But I mean, you had some great performances from Tyrese Maxey to make up for it. The only downside of this series is probably that it didn't go 7. that is the only thing that I can say that with definity, that I wish this series had gone 7 games. And I think that throughout all of these series, you had 2 teams that were very much close to either one of them taking it home and bringing it out and going to the second round. It just so happened that the Knicks were able to out hustle and get the wins when they matter most, especially down the stretch in the clutch. So amazing series, and I would love to see what the Sixers do going forward with the Tobias Harris I think he's coming off of his contract this season. And I would also love to see what the Knicks do. Like, if the Knicks do anything. Because I think if you take a healthy Knicks squad to the playoffs this season, I think they're easily conference finals bound. But you have to account, like, who's going to get injured. Because injuries are part of the game. And that's just part of what this league is injuries. And so accounting for that is key. So I think that will be interesting to see what both these teams do this offseason. But overall, phenomenal performances from both teams, from multiple players in both squads. They had Buddy Hield stepping up in, I believe it was game 3 or game 4, unfortunately missing the game-winning shot in, I think it was game 4, because I think that's when they went up 3-1, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly. But missing that game-winning shot, but overall having a great game up until that point. I think Buddy Hield really emerged in that game to be a reliable guy. And I think that you see how important the other guys are in your squads when it comes to the playoffs, because without them stepping up and performing well, you don't really have as good of chances, because if you're relying on your stars to be stars, there might be nights where your stars fall short. And I think that's ultimately where the Sixers ended up falling short in, was their stars, because of how hampered Joel Embiid was with his injury, and because of how able the New York Knicks depth was to be able to come in and Isaiah Hartenstein be a beast on the offensive glass, and for Dante DiVincenzo to be an amazing 3-point shooter coming in and shooting lights out for you guys. Like, the Knicks were ready and were a unit, and I think that the Sixers need to really fill out the rest of their roster with guys who are more reliable than a Tobias Harris. And overall, I think it was a great series. I think throughout the first round, I think I made it clear that was my favorite series of the first round. So amazing series, and we're gonna move on to my favorite series of the playoffs so far, which was number 1, the Denver Nuggets versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. I believe our second Game 7, or it might have been our third, depending on the scheduling of the Knicks and Pacers Game 7. But a Game 7 in the second round, and man, was that a fun series. You saw Anthony Edwards emerge as a star in those first two games in Denver, just completely showing out, especially in Game 1. And you saw the defense from Karl Anthony Towns on Jokic throughout the beginning and end of the series. You saw Jokic able to pick apart the defense in the middle of the series. And you saw a team go from 2-0 to going up 3-2 to then losing it all. Like, it had story. It was back and forth. And you saw a Timberwolves team who was on the rise emerge as the victors. And I think Karl Anthony Towns' story is so great here, because he goes and he is the number 1 overall pick for the Timberwolves from years and years ago. I believe it was the 2016 draft, was it? Might have been the 2015 or something, or whatnot. I'm not entirely sure if I remember the exact draft class of Karl Anthony Towns, but you saw him as the number 1 overall pick come in through all of the adversity, through all of the ups and downs, through his mother's death, through the trade rumors from him potentially getting out of Minnesota, come in and in Game 7 step up and really bring it home for the Minnesota Timberwolves, not only on the offensive end, but also on the defensive end. And he is the reason why the Timberwolves are even still playing right now. You know, just 25 points, I believe, in Game 4 of the Western Conference Finals. But going back to the Nuggets series, his defense on Jokic was passable, and that's all you need. That's all you need when you're guarding the best player in the league. And I think that the Denver Nuggets kind of made themselves, in my eyes, the enemy, because you had a team where things weren't going the way they were getting hounded, and you got your second best player throwing stuff on the court, get with minimal punishment and with like unapologetic towards that, and it's just like, I think that turned a lot of people's eyes to be like, let's hope that the Timberwolves win this series, and they did. And I was rooting for the Timberwolves ever since Jamal Murray threw that first towel or whatever he threw. But I think that this series was close in many of its games. I think that it had the performances that you wanted from your stars. I think that it had one blowout game, I believe it was game 6. And all these other games were pretty close, especially game 7. Game 7 was exactly what you would have wanted from a game 7, essentially, and the Timberwolves were able to pull through and bring it home. And I think that series alone is probably going to be the series that many people remember from this playoff run, which is why it's my number one series this playoff so far. And I'll throw in my couple honorable mentions. These would probably have been like 4 and 5 if we were doing a top 5 rankings video or rankings segment here. But my first honorable mention, shockingly, we're going to go with the Magic versus Cavs. I mean, obviously, they started off with 4 blowout wins, but those last 3 games, man, like, I don't know, man. Something about those last 3 games and seeing Paolo's emergence, as well as Donovan Mitchell's playoff rising abilities, as well as Jared Allen getting 20 rebounds in one game. As much as it pains me as a Magic fan to be like, man, Jared Allen got 20 rebounds on us this one game, it's cool and amazing to watch greatness happening before your eyes. And that's what we witnessed with Donovan Mitchell, with Jared Allen, with Paolo Banchero, with Franz Wagner in Game 4. And I think that being able to see these two teams, one team trying to make something of this season and one team on the rise currently, you see this battle, and it really brought us this pretty good Game 7. Not like the greatest, but it had a really nice comeback from the Cavs. And I think it brought us this really great 7-game series that I think was lacking throughout the first round, because you had a Game 6 from the Knicks versus Sixers, but, and I believe you had a Game 6 from the Pacers Bucks, but I think Pacers Bucks and Knicks Sixers, those were close games and close series, but I think at some point there was pretty good confidence that one team or the other was winning, and I think that for the Cavs Magic, I think we were, especially going into the second quarter of that Game 7, it was like, man, the Magic could pull this out, and it was kind of just a hit or miss, like who might win this series. So I think that was a good way to wrap up the first round. And then another honorable mention, I'm going to say Celtics versus Pacers, as well as Pacers versus Bucks. We'll throw them in there as well. Pacers Bucks, I think, is an underrated series. We had I believe a double overtime game, did we? Right, with Chris Middleton hitting some crazy shots, and we had some pretty great performances. Pascal Siakam had a great performance. I think the reason why I don't highlight it as much is because Dame and Giannis were both injured. I don't think that, I'm not trying to knock the Pacers. I do not knock the Pacers. I think the Pacers made it to the conference finals. They played their opponents and they played well. And they played well in the conference finals, which is why I put the Pacers Celtics series so high as well. But if we're looking at the games from the Bucks series, I think that there were moments in that series where I kind of was watching and I was like, man, I honestly just don't see the Bucks coming through here. Like, it just didn't look great. And so from there, I think that it kind of diminished the rest of the series for me personally. Now, I might rewatch the series here as we enter the off season after the finals are done and everything, or like even during the finals in between games or whatever. But as of right now, I don't have too great of an attachment to the Pacers Bucks series, but the Pacers Celtics series, I was glued into on that, and man, was that a series. There was one game that was, I believe, like kind of relatively a blowout with the Game 2, but Game 1, Game 3, and Game 4 were all bangers, and it was very enjoyable. Now, was there a moment as a basketball fan watching this series where I thought that the Pacers won this series or won this game. I mean, yeah, I think game one, I definitively was like, man, the Celtics really sold game one out towards the end of that game before Jaylen Brown hits that crazy shot sending it to overtime. I think that game two and game three, there was less panic with me because I was just like, man, you could sense a difference in the composure level between the Celtics and the Pacers, where both teams could be making mistakes at the same time in the clutch. But I looked at the Pacers and I could feel that, and I see this like worry about the mistakes. Whereas I look at the Celtics and there's more of a composed, more, I don't want to say dignified, but more like put togetherness from the Celtics, because they've been here year in and year out over the past like 6 to 8 years. So to see how the difference was between the Celtics and the Pacers in terms of their mental throughout these situations was very interesting. And I would say that game 3 and game 4, I wasn't super worried about the Pacers pulling out. There was still a lot of fight from the Pacers, and I think that that's commendable, and I think that it made for a fun series and a few fun games there, although it ended in a sweep. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about, and really the only other thing I'm going to talk about this episode, is going to be a shorter one, but I wanted to kind of just talk about the playoffs and talk about some narratives as well. And one of the narratives and the main narrative that I've seen being pushed, and it's kind of been towards the Pacers and also towards the Celtics, and it's been frustrating me a lot, has been how easy of a road this has been for the Pacers and the Celtics to get to where they were, or get to where they are or were at, and it frustrated me because I'm looking at who the Celtics are playing and I'm like, yeah, there's injuries, but every team has injuries they're going through, right? And it infuriated me even more because now you have people talking about how the Mavs were going through the gauntlet to get to the conference finals when Kawhi Leonard was injured in round one. Like, I don't know why or how people forgot that, but we're just going to casually dismiss the Dallas Mavericks beating a Clippers team when their best player is injured. And I understand that Kawhi being injured in the playoffs is just a given at this point, but we're going to ignore the fact that he's still the best player on the team, and he was out for a couple of those games and was not a full 100% in the games that he did play. And to ignore that and to magnify the Jimmy Butler being out, or Donovan Mitchell and Jared Allen being out for the Celtics, and Tyrese Halliburton being out for the Pacers, right? And to magnify Giannis and Dame and Randall, Brunson, all these players getting hurt during the Knicks series, like, to magnify those things, but to minimize the injuries that other teams have had to go through kind of is frustrating. And from a guy who's trying to enjoy the game as it is, knowing that injuries are a part of the game, it can be frustrating because now I'm looking at the Celtics run, right? And I'm not going to say the Celtics had a difficult run. They really didn't. But I think it's devaluing how great the Celtics have been this season, because the Celtics have been the most dominant team in basketball throughout the entire season, and we're supposed to just act like one player in Jimmy Butler and in the Miami Heat is going to change that completely. I think that series is a little bit closer in some of those games and maybe gets pushed to 6 games, but that series is wrapped in 6 games tops, right? If we're talking about the Cavs and getting Donovan Mitchell and Jared Allen back, right? Let's just throw in Porzingis, because Porzingis was out during that series too, right? If Porzingis is there and Jared Allen and Mitchell are there, I think that's also wraps in 6 games tops. Like, I am looking at this Boston Celtics team. They've been great all season long. All season long, the Boston Celtics have been doing work on every single team around the league, besides like the Denver Nuggets. But the Denver Nuggets didn't make it out of the second round, so we didn't even talk about it. But the Celtics have been dominant throughout the entire season. And so now we're supposed to expect that this Celtics team, who is playoff seasoned, we're not going to sit here and say that the Celtics have not been, like the Celtics players and who makes up the Celtic roster have not been on deep playoff runs. This is a team that has a ton of playoff experience and has been known to have certain players step up in playoff settings, right? And we're just going to completely bypass that because, one player was injured on the 8th seed that barely made it to the playoffs. Like, let's be real. And let's be honest with ourselves. We're not going to look at this Heat team and be like, oh yeah, they're going to catch lightning in a bottle twice. That's not how this league works, okay? And to say that the Heat have a really, really great chance if they're fully healthy, I think is so disingenuous and so demeaning towards how the Celtics have been playing all year. Let's try to backtrack real quick because I need to see in the past 5 seasons what the roads have been like for some of these finals teams. Not even like champions, but just finals teams, because we're talking about easiest road to the finals, right? We look at last year, literally 1 season ago, right? We had the Nuggets play the Timberwolves, who were the 8th seed, who were not the Timberwolves of today whatsoever, and they beat them in 5. We had them go against the Suns, who then had gotten an injured Chris Paul and was Ayton on that team. I don't think Ayton was on that team. No, Ayton got traded, I believe, this past offseason. So DeAndre Ayton, who was not playing great, and Chris Paul, who got injured that series, and they beat them in, I believe, 6, right? And then you had the Lakers, who they swept, right? And they were the 7th seed, the Lakers. Regardless of how good the Lakers were in that playoff run, they still were the 7th seed. Though they still had LeBron, they still were the 7th seed. They still were not the best possible matchup that the Nuggets could have rolled from that side of the bracket. I think the Warriors could have potentially been a tougher challenge for the Nuggets in that conference finals. Maybe even the Kings could have been a tough challenge too. Especially since the Nuggets kind of know how to play around the Lakers, right? But regardless, you had an 8th seed, a 4th seed, and a 7th seed, and then an 8th seed in the finals. Like, no one's talking about that, or no one's discrediting the Nuggets for making it to where they did, mainly because they didn't run into injuries too much. Because the Timberwolves were fully healthy, the Lakers were fully healthy, and the Heat were not fully healthy, but we're going to ignore that because they were the 8th seed of Heat, and no one really expected them to win with Tyler Hero or without Tyler Hero, But we're talking about a team that, regardless of who if all the teams they faced were injured or not, who played 0 top 3 seeds in either conference to win their championship, right? And no one's discrediting them, and I'm sure as heck I'm not discrediting them, but I just want to paint the picture here, right? We go back to 2022. I believe 2022, it wasn't as big of like a problem because you had a Warriors run that was pretty valid throughout after they beat the Nuggets. So I won't touch upon the Warriors run too much, but let's go to the Bucks run, okay? Because the Bucks run is where I got some issues too. Because I would love to see the people who are still chirping about how Giannis doesn't have a real title, right? Because throughout the Bucks run, you had they beat the Heat in the first round. There was a 6th seed, right? They beat a Nets team with an injured James Harden, and were barely good enough to beat that Nets team. They also had a hampered Kyrie Irving, if I remember correctly. They also went against a 5-seeded Hawks that had no business being in the conference finals, and then in the finals went against the Suns, who had gotten Chris Paul injured during that series. And I know that one people were discrediting, but this is my thing. Why are we choosing actively to say, because this team is facing the team that made it this far, why are we questioning that, right? If the Hawks beat the Sixers, right, clearly the Hawks were better than the Sixers. Now, you can say what you want about them not being a better matchup than the Sixers for the Bucks, right? But the Hawks beat the Sixers. The Hawks stepped up and won. So now that's who they face in the conference finals. That if you want to blame anyone for the Bucks winning so easily in 2021, blame the Sixers if you want, because clearly I guess that's who the problem is for, right? Blame the Nets for not actually winning that series, I guess, because they made it pretty tough for the Bucks. You know, it's not like the Bucks had an easy road, even though there was injuries. That doesn't invalidate their championship, and they still had it tough at times, right? So it just is. Let's make it consistent, right? If a team has an easy road, why are we faulting it now so much? Like, we're pointing out so much, but at the end of the day, who's really going to care? Because we're not still talking about this Bucks team as like fake champions. They're champions, right? And to be so adamant about invalidating that championship now, like, it makes no sense to me. Why are we so hard pressed about who's winning right now and how they're winning right now, when at the end of the day, 10 years from now, we're not going to remember who won what. We're just going to remember, oh, they won the title that year. They were the best team in the league that year. Let's be real. Come on. We got 2020 Lakers. They didn't really have too much invalidation, I would say, in terms of the teams they played. But, I mean, you look at who they played. They played 8, 4, 3, and then 5. It's not a bad line of seeding, and there wasn't too many injuries, right? The Toronto Raptors beat the Magic, who were the 7th seed. They beat the Sixers in a rough series. They beat the Bucks in a rough series, and then they beat the Warriors, who were injured, right? Is anyone invalidating the Raptors championship? Now, people might say they probably wouldn't have won the title had the Warriors been fully healthy. Well, of course they wouldn't have won the title had the Warriors been fully healthy. But the fact of the matter is the Warriors were not fully healthy, and they were not built to sustain for injury. And if you're not built to sustain for injury, if you get injury, then that's it. That's wraps, right? So let's please look at what the players are playing, because they have no control over who they're playing. But let's look at what the players are playing, who the players are playing. Recognize that many of these injuries are completely out of their control. And please just allow these players to play the game that's in front of them. Because it's like the Boston Celtics, like I said, have been dominant. And if you give us a fully healthy playoffs, there is no doubt in my mind that the Boston Celtics would have still ended up in the Eastern Conference Finals and would have been probably playing either the Knicks, Sixers, or Bucks, right? That's their only challenge at that point, right? Because I do not believe that in a fully healthy playoffs, the Heat or the Cavs or the Magic are going to be real threats to the Boston Celtics, right? And I know that as a Magic fan, maybe I should have a little bit more faith in my team. No, I'm being realistic. I'm a realistic guy, right? And realistically speaking, there is no universe that is going to have a healthy playoffs, right? Have the Boston Celtics anywhere less than the conference finals. And you have the Bucks matchup, which I think the Celtics will have won because of their better cohesion and playoff experience. I think the Sixers matchup, you have I think the Sixers, a healthy Sixers matchup is the most interesting matchup you're going to get out of this, right? I think that the Knicks, if they're fully healthy, maybe, because then you have Julius Randle back. But if we're talking about injuries sustained in the playoffs, then I think that then we have the Knicks without Julius Randle, right? Then the Knicks are cooked. But I think that with Julius Randle, there might be a glimmer of hope for the Knicks there. But overall, I think that the Celtics, most of the time, I'd say probably like 75 to 80% of the time, are going to be going to the finals one way or another, whether it's a catwalk, whether it's a grueling conference finals, whatever the case may be, because this team has been the most dominant team in basketball, and this team has been the best team in basketball this entire season. There's a reason why this team had like no coverage. No one was talking about how great the Boston Celtics were because they've just been great. No one's talking about the Boston Celtics and how far they may make it in the playoffs because it's expected that they're going to make it far in the playoffs at this point. They have made it to the conference finals. They made it in 2020. No, they made it in 2018, 2020, 2022. They made it to the finals. 2023, they made it to the conference finals. And then 2024, they made it to the conference finals. That's 5 times out of the last 8 seasons. They've made it to the conference finals, and they made it today. Or this season as well, right? 6 times in the last 8 seasons. They missed it in 2021. They missed it in 2019. Every other year, they have been in the conference finals. It is expected that the Celtics have good playoff success. And to sit here and say that the best version of this Celtics team that we've seen to date since 2018 would not make the conference finals just because a couple of players would be healthier or that their road would be any harder. Yes, their road's going to be harder because the star players are playing, right? But to say that, the Celtics might not be here, or, the Celtics would be having way more grueling series, I don't think is true. Because if you look at the Celtics, how they've been built this season, how they've played this season, if everyone's healthy, because screw it, if we're going to say that Donovan Mitchell and Jared Allen are healthy, let's give Porzingis the health card too. If we're going to say Jimmy Butler's healthy, let's make sure that Porzingis never gets hurt either, right? If everyone's healthy, I don't see the Celtics losing until the finals. And even then, the finals depends on the matchup because the Timberwolves may be able to beat them. The Mavs might be able to beat them. The Nuggets might have been able to beat them. But at the end of the day, the Celtics made it to where they are because they are a really good basketball team. And the same thing with the Pacers. The Pacers made it to where they were because they are a really, really good basketball team. That is the fact of the matter. And though the Pacers may not be as good as a fully healthy Bucks team, the fact of the matter is they didn't play a fully healthy Bucks team. They played who was in front of them, and they beat them. And this isn't to say that the Pacers would have been ran off the court with a fully healthy Bucks team, because I don't think they would have. The Pacers offense is phenomenal. Rick Carlisle is an amazing coach, and watching the Pacers offense live, not in person, but live on TV, right? Watching that Pacers offense live and it flowing the way it did, even when Tyrese was out of the lineup, it's beautiful. And to say that team doesn't stand a chance just because of injuries, it doesn't make sense to me. That team's good, and I would have expected that Bucks series to go 6 even with a healthy Giannis, whether or not the Pacers or the Bucks won it, And so to sit back and just one more time, right? Let's please stop hating on the success of teams or how the teams are getting success. Just please don't. Let's talk about the success. Recognize, hey, maybe there might have been a different outcome, but the fact of the matter is this is what we had and this is what happened, right? And I think it's important for organizations to recognize where they are at personally, right? Before making any rash decisions like the Hawks did with the DeJounte Murray trade. But I think that to completely write off of a conference finals appearance is so disrespectful. So let's please appreciate the success and greatness that we get to see on a nightly basis. And let's please appreciate the skill that we are seeing on display, because to sit here and just completely knock on how well the Celtics have been playing, and completely knock on how well the Pacers have been playing, or completely knock on how well any team in history has played, whether it's the Bucks in 2021, whether it's the Nuggets in 2023, whether it's some older team from the past I'm not mentioning. Let's please appreciate the team that we got to see play and appreciate how they played and what they did and appreciate the greatness that they displayed, because it is ridiculous how much hate players and teams get for absolutely no reason and stuff that is completely out of their own control. Now, I know I talked a lot about the absurdity of the hatred of certain teams' successes and whatnot due to injuries and stuff. So I hope that you bear with me, and I hope that you understand my frustration with this, because you got teams like the Celtics, like the Nuggets, like the Bucks, who faced real adversity because of their competition or because of the health of their competition or the level of skill of their competition, where it's like that team made it and they were the best team out of where up to where they were at. But I think that about wraps up what I had to say about that narrative going around, the narrative like discrediting champions, whether it's the 2019 Raptors, the 2020 Lakers, because they played in the bubble, and for some reason people think that that's a bad thing when every team was playing out of their minds in the bubble. Like, let's be real, come on. But yeah, I think that we just need to appreciate the greatness that's in front of us, and I hope that Magic fans are able to do that when the time comes for us to be great as well once again. I think that time is coming very accelerated, and we've seen glimpses of that even now. So I hope that Magic fans are able to appreciate it when it comes for Paolo and Franz and Suggs and all the guys here in Orlando. But until then, we will just have to wait. I hope you guys have an amazing week. I'll talk to you guys next week. Have a blessed day. God loves you. Peace.